son los dedos, estrógenos y andrógenos.
I thought I was last.
12 minutos, 12 minutes.
Okay, digit ratio, folks. Feel free to look at your fingers when I'm doing this, but don't blame me if you're disappointed. What is digit ratio? Well, if you look at the hand on the left and look at the ring finger and the index finger, you'll see it's quite a remarkable hand. The ring finger is about a centimeter longer than the index finger. And the ring finger is actually an indicator of prenatal testosterone before birth. The index finger doesn't do very much. It just kind of gives us a baseline. So the hand on the left is very much male, and the hand on the right is very much female. So males tend to have long ring fingers relative to their index fingers. Females tend to have ring fingers and index fingers which are approximately the same length. So it's a very, very simple trait, but of course, being scientists, we try to make it a bit more complicated so people can't understand it. So we measure it and do a bit of maths on it. So if you take the index finger and measure it, okay, take the ring finger and measure it, and then divide the index finger by the ring, and you will get your ratio. You must measure from the crease at the base of your finger, and you must do it accurately. If you do that with that male hand, we get a ratio of 0.95. So the lower the ratio, as you go down and down and down and down, the more testosterone you've had before birth. And it gets down to about 0.89 in very, very good athletes. A hand on the right, that's a female hand, and that is kind of more of an equal length, because females have relatively low testosterone compared to their estrogen prenatally. When does this happen? When is this ratio fixed? Well, it's fixed at the end of the first trimester, between weeks 8 and 12. And during that time, the fetus is growing very rapidly, and lots of things are happening to its brain, its musculature, its organ systems in general. Right, there have been lots and lots of studies about digit ratio, and some of them are not actually correct, I think, but nevertheless, some of these relationships are very strong, some are very, very weak. If you take someone with a long ring finger relative to their index finger, then you can talk about tendencies. But these are just tendencies, they're probabilities, okay? So somebody like that may have high sports performance in running, high strength, good in short-term financial trading, they tend not to smoke, they've got lots of sperm, have high fertility, large families if they're males, high IQ if they're males, attractive to females, at least they think they are. They rate their own bodies as attractive, and that's for both males and females. They're protected from heart disease to a certain extent, and that's for males. For females, there's some protection from cervical cancer. The downside of this is there's a tendency to autism and Asperger's. They tend to be hyperactive and have maybe a higher tendency of ADHD. Elevated chance of motor neuron disease, they're sensation-seeking. This ratio tends to be found in criminal offenders. They tend to be impulsive, maybe physically aggressive, tendency for prostate cancer, and a tendency for breast cancer. So if you look at your fingers and you're incredibly depressed, you can go now, and I'll counsel you later. Right, okay, so there's been lots and lots of studies, but I'm going to pick out 4 kind of areas today, and I want to look at running speed, occupational preferences in women, smoking choices, and quite a serious one, cancer of the lung. Here is a here is very much a male athlete. This guy is a champion international big wave surfer. And when I looked at his hands, I couldn't believe it. He's got a ratio of about 0.88. Unbelievable. And I have seen other athletes with similar ratios. If you look at something like middle distance running, you will see that these ratios are strongly predictive of running speed over, say, 1,500 meters or 5,000 meters or 10,000 meters. It's a typical scatter diagram, but basically what that is saying is that if you've got a low ratio and you run 5 races, you end up in the first 5 roundabout. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. If you've got a high ratio, you end up about 45th in the race. Incredibly depressing. Okay, what about occupational choices, smoking preferences, and lung cancer? Well, we have data from these, kind of indirect data from the BBC Internet study, where we have something like 255,000 participants. They all measured their fingers. You imagine kind of worldwide people looking at their fingers. From 6 ethnic groups, and there was 187 countries represented. In fact, we had some people measuring their fingers in the Antarctic, sitting down in the Antarctic, incredibly depressed. It's dark, and measuring their fingers. What can we get from these kinds of studies? Well, one thing they actually said was what their occupation was. And we have 22 occupations, and we can look at the proportion of males per occupation. And there we have the usual kind of stereotypical thing in engineering and skilled labor and IT and manufacturing. You've got high proportions of males, whereas in personnel management, healthcare, administration, and homemaking, very low proportions of males. If you look at the digit ratio of women who are in these occupations, then women with masculinized digit ratio, high prenatal testosterone, tend to find themselves in occupations like IT and engineering, whereas women with high digit ratios, a low prenatal testosterone, tend to find themselves as in personnel management and nursing and homemaking and so on. I don't think you can explain that away by invoking nurture. You can also look at differences in digit ratio across countries. And here we've got 30 countries, and I've ordered them in terms of prenatal testosterone. At the top is Mexico. Muchos testosterone, yeah. And I didn't make it up. I came out and I thought, oh, great. And then New Zealand, Iceland, and so on. At the bottom, we have countries like Greece, Hungary, Turkey, Bulgaria, and so on. And we can use these average digit ratios to correlate with virtually anything you can think of. If you correlate it with cigarette consumption, Mexico per capita has not got a high cigarette consumption. If you go to other countries with feminized digit ratios, they have high cigarette consumption per capita. And that's a strong relationship across those 30 nations. And we've done further work on this. And smokers, cigarette smokers, tend to have feminized digit ratios. Right, now, of course, everybody knows that smoking cigarettes increases your chance of getting lung cancer. And this is a typical, this slide's a typical kind of epidemiological slide where, you know, they look at the number of cigarettes consumed per capita per country, and then they look at the incidence of lung cancer. In this case, it's what are called DALYs, the disability-adjusted life years, lost through illness from lung cancer. And typically you get this positive correlation. However, if you go back to the digit ratio correlation, that's a stronger correlation. And I think one needs to now kind of tease out the causality and the interactions here. Because if prenatal testosterone gives you a tendency to avoid smoking, or low prenatal testosterone gives you a tendency to smoke, then that may also give you, it follows on a tendency to develop lung cancer. So cause and effect needs to be sorted out on this particular one. And in fact, when we look at the mean digit ratio per nation, and there's Mexico again in that nice position, there is a strong tendency for nations with high digit ratio to have high rates of dailies for trachea, bronchus, and lung cancer. Okay, so just a flavor across 4 traits of what digit ratio might help us to predict. There's lots of work to be done on this area, and there are more and more papers being published on digit ratio on cancers, for example, and this is quite an exciting area for me. Just to go over what I've discussed, low digit ratio, high prenatal testosterone. I'm terrified of Anders' hammer here. So low digit... High prenatal testosterone, predictive of running speed. Women with low digit ratio tend to be found in occupations that have high percentages of men. High digit ratio per nation is linked to cigarettes.
Un aplauso, por favor. Muy bien, excellent. Thank you very much, Tim.